my name is Rita and you're watching my channel Pretty Much Paper. Today I'm going to show you how you can make your own vinyl decals to decorate your Cricut Joy. The Cricut Joy is Cricut's newest cutting machine. It's able to draw and cut, and I've found it really useful for a lot of my smaller projects over the last month. I'm really excited to finally get around to decorating my Cricut. You're going to see all the steps that I'm going to go through to do so. It's going to cover the entire front of the machine, and also I'll be putting my business logo right across the top. I hope that you'll find this video useful. Alright, so here I am in Design Space. I'm going to start a new project and head over to the upload. I created my own design in Procreate, and I'm just going to find that SVG file and upload it here. From there I can insert the file into my canvas. And the first step is just making sure that the sizing is correct. I actually did a test run ahead of this, and it turned out that setting the group width at 3.8 was the best fit with respect to the white space on the Cricut Joy itself. One thing to note is that since it is an SVG file, each individual component can be separated out. This can be useful if you want to use multiple different colors or maybe change the layout before it prints out. However, if you ungroup the items to do this and just move over to make it, Cricut will typically reposition those items the way that they see fits the best. However, as you can see, this fit actually can waste quite a bit of material. They tend to space out the different shapes a little bit more than I personally would like to see. So, and I also know that the Cricut is more than capable of cutting things in closer proximity. So I'd like to do that manually myself so then we can save as much material as possible. So I'm going to actually cancel this cut and go back into Design Space and move the materials back close together and hit attach. This is going to keep all of these grouped together when we go into the Make It screen. Now that I can see everything is positioned well, I can go ahead and start the cut. It's going to look for the Cricut Joy, and once it identifies it, then we can select our material. I'm going to be using a standard premium vinyl for this. It is not a smart vinyl, although you can of course use that as well. So I'm moving down and selecting my specific material type. And next it's going to be time to load the material. As I mentioned, I'm using a standard vinyl, which means that it's actually 12 inches wide, which is much wider than what the Cricut Joy is able to accommodate. So I'm going to need to trim this vinyl down. I'm using the Cricut trimmer to do this. It has this extension arm that will help you in making sure that your measurements are accurate. So I'm going to go ahead and load up the vinyl into this cutter. And it's important to note that the Cricut Joy's maximum width is 4.5 inches. The 4.5 is actually the same as what you'll see as the width on the standard Cricut Joy mats. So once that's set up, I can cut down and you'll see that it's going to fit really neatly into the Cricut Joy. So I'm going to be using my extra long light grip mat. This mat actually goes all the way down to 12 inches, which is perfect for this project since it is about 8 inches, I want to say, of cut shapes. So by using this mat, we can get it all done in one shot. So I've removed the top clear layer from the top of the mat, and I'm going to smooth down the material by hand. I'm also going to use a brayer, which I'm showing here. It is basically just a rubberized roller that is going to help make sure that I have even pressure across the surface, so that way we make sure that the material sticks properly to the mat. So I'm moving my Cricut Joy a little bit closer to me because when you feed in the extra long mat, it needs an equivalent amount of space behind the Cricut Joy. So just don't want to knock anything over. You can see that it's getting loaded up right now. And we'll be ready to start our cut. I'm hitting go and it is starting now. So because this design is pretty large it's going to take quite a bit of time to finish cutting. I'm already fast forwarding through this, and we'll just skip a little bit in the middle. So here is the finished cut. I think it looks pretty good, so we're going to move the Cricut Joy back out of the way and start removing the material. It is easiest to do this by actually flipping the entire mat over and then peeling the mat away from the material. This helps to keep your material flat and it will not warp if you do it this way. And be sure to also place your protective cover back over the mat when you're done using it. So now that the material is off of the mat, I'm going to start to trim off some of the excess material that was not cut, which I can then save and use for a future project. I really like keeping all the scraps that come from this process. It's also really great for doing test cuts if you have like really small intricate designs that you just want to make sure will show up correctly. The next step is to cut out each individual decal. So I'm doing this here, and once again I'm going to just speed up the whole process through this sheet. So now that everything is complete, I can move on to the next step, which is going to be weeding out the excess material outside of the decal design. So I'm using a Cricut weeder for this process. It's got this pointy end to it, which is going to help to remove the material really easily. All you have to do is put the pointy side into the vinyl in a space where you want to remove that vinyl, lift up, and it'll just peel away from the perimeter of your design. Be sure to check for any other openings that may need to have this weeding process as well, such as the opening in the middle of this triangle. So I'm going to go through this process for each of the decals and once again hit that fast forward button. So now I'm wrapping up the weeding. As you can see, some of these designs are a little bit more intricate than others, so when you're doing this, just be really careful that you're not missing any components, and also it does help to sort of take things a little bit more slowly just to be sure that you're not removing things that you shouldn't be as well. So here are all of the decals and they're ready to go. I'm going to go through one additional step to get these really ready to apply. So I'm removing some of the excess material so that way it's a closer shape to the actual design itself. This will help in doing the placement for these shapes. This way we can make sure that things are not overlapping while keeping things as close together in the composition as is possible. If I left some of these really large extra chunks of paper on these, then it would have been much more difficult to figure out if things were overlapping or not. So the next step is to place each of the decals onto the Cricut Joy. So I'm doing this with a preliminary step, which is just doing an approximate placement. So I'm actually just doing this with Scotch tape. You can probably use a masking tape as well if you prefer, but it's just a temporary way to make sure that you're going to be putting all of your decals on your surface the way that will look the best for it. And in my case, the design actually has a lot of different components, so really making sure that the placement looks good is important. So that's why I'm going through this extra step. If you had a really simple design, you don't need to do this. Now that I know everything looks good, I'm going to start removing the decals one by one and making sure that the Scotch tape is lifted off of the surface as well, and I'm going to start to actually begin the permanent transfer process. So I've got some Cricut transfer tape, and I'm going to take my first decal and cut out a section of the transfer tape that will match the size of the first decal. From here, I'm going to need to remove the backing from the transfer tape. This is actually a pretty tricky process. You're going to want to make sure that you hang on to the backing, but you're going to take the tape once you are able to get it off of the backing and just apply that over top your decal. Once the transfer tape is on top of the decal properly, you can use a scraper or even a credit card to start to apply pressure onto the transfer tape so that way the vinyl will stick properly onto the transfer tape. It is beneficial to do it on both sides, so front and back. It's going to just really help with the adhesion. At this point, I'm moving some of the Scotch tape that would otherwise be covering some of the area that I want to place this decal. So be sure that if you do have this preliminary step, then you're making enough space so that way your vinyl is adhering to your surface instead of to some Scotch tape, which is supposed to be temporary. So here I am adhering this decal, and the last step is going to be using a scraper or again a credit card, any flat surface, and just sort of rubbing into the decal so that way now that the vinyl is going to adhere to the Cricut Joy. If you notice that your vinyl is coming up when you're trying to remove your transfer tape, then you just need to continue to work at it a little bit more with a scraper or an equivalent. It will eventually release. So there's my first decal, and I'm going to be repeating the process for each of the other decals that I have here. I wanted to highlight as well that I'm actually going to be using the exact same cut of transfer tape that I made for that first decal for a decent number of these decals. You can use your transfer tape over and over again. Of course, at some point it's not going to work as well, but it is definitely good for more than easily 3 or 4 uses, especially if the material isn't something like a glitter vinyl or anything that would leave behind a lot of residue. So I'm going to go ahead and continue this process and probably speed through some of the repetition. You may notice at this point that there are some air bubbles in some of the decals. I want to reassure you that this is normal. It can be prevented to an extent by using the scraper more carefully, but if bubbles do occur, they actually do tend to dissipate over time. So you can use your fingernail or just like some gentle additional pressure to work out some of those air bubbles. Another alternative is to find a very fine point needle or pin and sort of prick into the center of an air bubble, and that will help to release some of the appearance of that bubble. But really what I noticed most was that time seemed to be the answer to this problem. And that completes the whole front side of the Cricut. So this is the finished product. I'm really happy with this. You can see all the different Cricut supplies across the front. We've got our weeding tool and our spatula and the scraper, in addition to a whole bunch of other supplies that I use on a regular basis when I'm doing paper crafts and vinyl as well. I hope that you really enjoyed this video. If you really do like the decals that are on the front, I actually will make those available on my Etsy account, so you can go ahead and download that file. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. You may notice that the finished Cricut actually does include some decals that I did not review in this video, in particular the Cricut logo in the center. If you're interested in seeing how I was able to perfectly scale and size that logo for the Cricut Joy, you can check out my other video. I'll put the link in the description below. Thanks again for watching.